Thank you so much, Hanif, for sharing new work with us. That is truly a treat for us to be able to experience work that is not yet published and sort of in a state that we can really receive the energy behind it in real time, read by the author. So just one more hand for these reading of these new poems. And thank you so much to Natalie and Laura for thinking of me, little old me, as they say, to be in conversation with Hanif, who is here as our artist in residence. And we are very, very fortunate here at Stanford to have him here with us in that capacity, because I feel like for quite some time, in my own mind, I have been having chats with Hanif. Hadn't known me from, anybody else, at least not in person. But just his ability to communicate, right, feeling, and a deep analysis, right, and the two don't have to be separate from one another, is really something that really appeals to me in many ways. And so it's really lovely to be here in conversation with you. And I think that we'll kind of hop right into it so that we can get, to the things that we have had a chance to chat just a bit about before. So I want to tackle the theme of what is a public intellectual today, right, through a conversation about how you have developed organically over time into a poet, essayist, critic, and intellectual who helps to shape public culture and discourse in real ways, right? And so just to give you a chance to kind of situate your own self in the context of how we understand what a public intellectual is, I want you to sort of think about for us, or express to us what your relationship is, I guess, to the nomenclature of public intellectual, and is there a better way maybe to describe yourself and your work in that capacity?
I hope so.
Yeah.
I'm really discouraged by the term public intellectual, in part because, I've been someone who's like, most of my life has been on the outside of academia. It still is, you know what I mean? And there's a way that the term public intellectual is affixed to a specific kind of person that we are meant to believe is rare. It's almost like the term genius, which I guess we might get into later too.
Right.
But this idea that in Toni, I love Toni Morrison. She's the most important person in my life, next to my mom, I think, is Miss Morrison. And her disdain for the word genius because of how it was affixed to Black people, and it created this sense of rarity, and this sense of the rare Black genius, which is actually an enemy to accountability. We cannot hold ourselves accountable if we believe our genius is rare. You feel me? And so this idea of to put it a different way, I live in Columbus, Ohio, one of the old Black neighborhoods in Columbus, Ohio. I take runs around my neighborhood all the time. There's this young Black kid who plays outside. I see him often. We say what's up. Maybe 9, and I saw him 3 weeks ago. It had rained the night before. He was looking in a puddle, staring very troubled at this puddle. And I was like, "What's going on, bro?" You know what I mean? He's like, "Well," it's like the smartest kid alive. He's like, "Well, there was a rainbow in the puddle, and I could see the rainbow across my face in the reflection, and now I'm trying to move so that it happens again." That's a public intellectual because he's trying to work out a very existential issue out loud, you know what I mean? But there's not a space to say, well, I have been pushed to think about the world differently by this 9-year-old Black kid who lives on my block. Therefore, he is in some sense an elder, a genius, a public intellectual to me in that moment. Because there's this fixation on the idea that particularly the Black intellectual is like a comet, across sky for a moment and then you never get one again. Or you get a once in a generation type thing. When I actually think there's a real abundance so I really resist the term public intellectual, in part because, to be quite frank too, a lot of my intellectual interests were boxed out from spaces like this for a very long time. Because I do think that my central concern is that of the heart and that of feeling, and how to perhaps find an articulation for the bewilderment I feel at being alive in a time of both terror and beauty, And the lens through which I'm trying to thread that needle is all popular culture type shit. And people didn't actually have a lot of interest in that or investment in that for a long time. And I've actually been, and I'm not resentful about this at all, because another thing that Miss Morrison teaches us is that you turn away from those and do your work. You turn away from those who don't believe in your work and do your work. And but I do bristle at the sense of, at the language of public intellectual, because to me, I'm surrounded by people who are working out large problems publicly, daily, and they're on porches, they're outside corner stores, they're at the spades table, these kind of things.
Absolutely. And you mentioned Miss Morrison and Toni Morrison, who also for me and many of us here, I'm sure, has a significant impact on how we even just think.
Yeah.
Right? Just one little sentence, and I'm like ruminating on that for years.
Yeah, great. She's the greatest Ohioan to ever live, by far,
Listen.
like by miles.
A fact.
It's like Toni Morrison, and then probably like low-key John Brown, because I feel like if you kill a slave owner, you know what I mean? You automatically kind of
It's up a little bit on that.
People be like, top 5 Ohioans, I wish they could all be black, but that motherfucker killed a slave owner.
Okay.
So you know what I mean?
Listen, I'll be John Brown, as they said. So in relation to just what you mentioned around Toni Morrison, maybe you can talk a little bit about, and again, because you're speaking so capaciously about how we imagine and think through what intellectualism is in the first place, right?
Yeah.
The ability to think critically, to really be able to assess materials, to be able to think across and around. Like it's not something, as you have talked about, that it only happens, on rare occasions. It's something that we can witness in real time if we're actually paying attention.
Yeah.
Right. And not sort of stuck in these hierarchies that you are pointing to. But I wonder who some of your earliest influences were on your writing, and thinking about this, from a way that I think that you already consider, but in any way. So not just writers, but performers, athletes, right? Just kind of across the board. What were some of the earliest things that you remember that began to shape now how you think about yourself as a writer?
My mother was a writer, but she worked 2 jobs. She worked for the city of Columbus, and she worked at J.C. Penney. There was a call center at Columbus. So she would work 2 jobs. She had an old typewriter. And she would come home and write a novel on her old typewriter. And I was interested in the labor of the typewriter, the work that it took to write on a typewriter. And I would always watch my mother work. She had her bedroom, my parents' bedroom was like upstairs, and so I would like sneak up the stairs and just sit, and so much of my childhood was spent watching the back of my mother in her huge afro. She would like take off her hijab, and her afro was so huge, just like painstakingly working at a typewriter. And I remember watching her complete a page, and she seemed so overjoyed by that. My mother also read in our house. We grew up really poor. We didn't have money for books, and this was before a library was built in my neighborhood. So my mom had a lot of fiction, like fiction by black women. That's what she read. So that was what was at our house. And that was, by extension, what I read, because when she, I was talking about Gloria Naylor yesterday. I read Women of Brewster Place when I was 10. And my mom gave me that book and was like, if there's anything in here that you have questions about, just talk to me about it. That was so important to me, to read that book at that age and be kind of horrified by it, but also, to this day, I don't know if anyone's read The Women of Brewster Place. The epilogue of that is one of my favorite writing in history. It's only like 4 pages, right? But the way that she talks about the aftermath of liberation, because that is that's what's happening at the end of Women of Brewster Place. Spoiler alert, I guess, but the book is like as old as everyone in this room, so there's an embargo that is up by now. But when they tear down the wall and it's like, we have a city again.
Yeah.
The book could have ended there. The book could have ended on this triumph of these black people who broke out of an open air prison, right? And instead, it's like there's an aftermath to liberation, and to put language against that. I would actually encourage everyone to go and read Women of Brewster Place literally today, and ask some real hard questions about the aftermath of liberation, and what is still required of us after the point where we decide liberation has occurred. So that's that. But I also grew up on like. I loved, and to this day, I still love singers, I grew up with music. There was music in my house all the time. And I grew up, I'm the youngest of 4, and everyone in my house had their own separate musical taste, which was a real gift for me, And so my sister was into like Riot Girl and hardcore and punk. My brother was into hip hop and metal, and my dad, but I loved big performances still. There's this, I don't know who had this on a VHS tape, but there's that very iconic performance of The Who performing Baba O'Reilly. The one where Pete Townsend for the first time does the windmill on the guitar. Do people know that performance at all? A few of you. And I remember watching that when I was a kid and being like, because it's not the commercialized version of that is you just know Pete Townshend's like windmilling guitar, but if you watch the full performance, which I would encourage, you actually see like the note traveling through his body. It's incredible. It's like I don't even like The Who that much. I actually don't, and Baba O'Reilly's like a fine song, but that performance transformed me because I was like, oh, music can actually travel through you physically, you know? And I remember just being so intrigued by live performance. Janet Jackson's Rhythm Nation tour. You know, I remember watching old clips from Janet Jackson's Rhythm Nation tour and being so moved by group choreography, this idea of multiple bodies acting as one body. All these things are really important to me. I mean, I didn't write at all until I was much, much older, but those things have formed me.
Yeah, so thinking about these early moments, you know, out of Ohio, right? Bootsy, Ohio Players, Lakeside, Bobby Womack, L.A. Reid, the OJs, Zap Band, right?
Yeah.
Eddie Levert, Gerald Levert, Tracy Chapman, Ruby Dee, Screamin' Jay Hawkins, as we talked about
Screamin'
in my
Jay
class
Cleveland.
yesterday, okay?
Yeah.
Kid Cudi, John Legend, I mean,
brother,
Bow Wow
yeah.
even, right? The
Yeah.
list goes on.
Van
and on
Hunt.
and on.
Van Hunt, who is married to Holly Berry,
Right.
who is also an Ohioan, and they are collectively the most beautiful Ohioan couple. Like, truly. Like, Van Hunt, I saw Van Hunt in person one time, and I was like, no man should look like that, actually. Quite honestly, like, no human should be
To
able to
have
walk.
that look.
Yeah. And he's, you know, like Holly Berry's Holly Berry. And two Ohioans, just beautiful Ohioans, married to each other. May we all be so lucky.
Well, listen, with that, I wonder how you would describe the soundtrack, right, of your youth in Cleveland and through Ohio, and in what ways has it, and you've talked about this in other ways, but just what ways has it shaped you?
I think one way that I was really lucky is that I grew up in what I would consider the golden era of college radio, 90s, early, mid-90s, late 90s too, and I had two siblings in college. And so they would just come back home with all this stuff, you know, that college radio was so different than what I was getting on, like, and I remember my first time hearing, like I remember the first time I heard Smells Like Teen Spirit. And I was like, and I could feel my brain changing. Like the first time I heard Slater Kinney, you know, and the first time I heard all these bands that I would come to love. And so and you would get DJ tapes out of New York, right? Like DJ tapes. And I really gravitated towards this idea of sitting by the radio waiting for your song. So much of my childhood was spent in my room. I spent a lot of time alone. People are always like, how did you get this kind of encyclopedic knowledge of music? And I'm always like, loneliness, actually. Comes at a cost, you know what I mean? And I promise you it was not cool. Like now it's like, oh, it's so cool that you know so much about music. I was like, I did not have girlfriends. You know what I mean? It's like, girls were not like, tell me about Kate Bush production techniques, you know what I mean?
But you knew about them, though.
But I knew about them. You know, I used to be on, this is in the message board era, when I was like 15, 16. I was on these message boards, like record collector message boards, and I would lie about my age because I wanted to talk about, and they wouldn't take me seriously, but I knew it was I was like, I am 56, but I would sit by the radio and I would wait for songs to come on, and something about that was really meaningful to me. You learn not only patience, but you learn how to build towards something. Because if you're recording off the radio, you have to do certain things. You have to know how to stop a cassette tape so you don't get the click when you stop. You have to like, hold down the pause button and stop button. You have to at least approximate the time when the DJ will interrupt the fade out of a song. You have to kind of, like I remember recording Tony Braxton's You Are My Everything off the radio. I love Tony Braxton. Just had a birthday yesterday, by the way. Happy birthday, Miss Braxton. Libra, indeed. Also, Libra, the name of the best Tony Braxton album, if anyone is interested in listening to that. And I remember feeling like I had this sense of control that I didn't have anywhere else. When you're the youngest of four, you don't control anything. You don't control the radio in anyone's car. You don't control where you sit at the kitchen table. You don't control like dip, you know? And so there was this sense of power that I felt in the making of a mixtape purely based off of, and it was a secondhand power passed down from a radio DJ, you know? But I love that, and my childhood was so rooted in that, in exploration. My siblings had these massive collections of hip hop cassettes, and I would read liner notes. I'm obsessed with the liner note as a form. One devastating thing to me about the streaming era is that we have lost the material reality of the liner note, which actually means we lose an opportunity to understand lineage with real depth.
Absolutely.
Because you don't just read liner notes to read about what makes a song. You read people who are thanking other people. When I first got into poems, which was 2012, 2013, I read books and then I would flip directly to the back of those books and I would see who that poet thanked and I would go find those books. I would read these liner notes of rap albums and I would jot down the samples and then I would go to my parents' record collections and try to find the original sample. That was so important for me when I was young. Because it embedded me with this sense of curiosity of seeking the root cause of something's existence, you know? And I think that still defines me as a poet, as a person, I don't know. Like truly, when I don't have an MFA, I was terrible at school. And so when I was learning poems, it was just some shit where it was like, the first book I ever got was Gabriel Calacaresi's The Last Time I Saw Amelia Earhart. And I remember flipping to the back and being like, I fucked with the book. So I thought, this poet maybe has some poets they fuck with. I want to find who those people are. That's all from being a child and being curious about the liner note as a form of lineage reproduction.
So just to point at something, again, to disrupt this notion of a public intellectual being a rare thing that only occurs, you know, within particular elite spaces, just the curiosity that you have, something that I find to be, you know, kind of very clear throughout your work, right, throughout your interviews, throughout the way you talk about your life. There's a certain level of curiosity that seems to just continue to drive the way that you move as an artist and as a writer and as a thinker, right? And also it's kind of at the base of the very nuance. Again, you know, one of the reasons that I felt such a synergy around your work is because, you know, there's certain things that I think about musically and sonically that resonate in so many different ways and are informed by other people, like my dear sister Imani Uzuri, who helps me to think about sound and embodiment and history in different ways. But sometimes I come to a conclusion and I'm like, where? And then I read something of yours, I'm like, are we vibrating on the same wavelength or frequency, right? But there's a certain curiosity that kind of just leads you in so many different directions. And maybe we can think again about your continued development as a writer and essayist and critic and poet, right? Of how you came into music writing, which was, I've read, through punk.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
I was in the punk scene. I came up in the punk scene in the Midwest in the early 2000s, which was like the heyday, right? Because it was this moment where there was this window of time, not to sound like Lester Bangs and Almost Famous, but there was this window of time where it was really idyllic and then it was not, right? And so you had this moment where all these hardcore bands were coming out of Chicago, Detroit, Pittsburgh, Ohio, and then major labels started to hover. And they were like, instead of being hardcore bands, why don't you become pop punk bands? And we will give you $1 million. And every band was like, yeah, we can do that.
Hell yeah.
But before that, every scene had its own zine, kind of reporting on the state of the scene. And everyone wanted a zine in Central Ohio, but no one wanted to write in that motherfucker. Everyone was just like, we're just gonna go to Kinko's and print a bunch of photos. And I thought, well, for sure, cool, I guess, but what an opportunity to report on the state of the place I am. So I thought about writing first as an act of service, as an act of kind of reporting through service, and to say, I want to make my position in the world feel irresistible, which is also a Morrisonian thing. That's also a Toni Morrison thing, right? Which at the time, it's not like I was like 19 in a fucking dive bar listening to a hardcore band like, I'm gonna be Toni Morrison of punk. But that impulse of, from my position in the world, there's a point at which I can make this place somewhere you would like to be. And that solves multiple problems. It solves the problem of loneliness. It also solves the problem of this world feeling inaccessible to anyone who cannot immediately witness it. It also solves the grander problem, which is that of, again, lineage correction and connection. To say, like, this band is coming out of Columbus, it's tied to this band in Detroit. And it also, for me, solved the very real problem of, not even a problem, but I grew up around black punks. I was around a lot of black punks because I was a black punk, and my early thing was, where are the other black punks? And I was lucky because they were in Dayton, they were in Detroit, they were in Chicago. You know, I found them really early. And it was this thing where we would roll the shows together, which we had to do because, you know, it was one of those things where like, none of us really want to fight, but it's better if there are multiple of us, you know, if we have to fight, which, you know. And there was this real line of demarcation, I remember, when we went from being anxious about being at these shows to saying, actually, these shows are as much ours, if not more, than everyone in this room. And so the other problem I think writing from that perspective solved was, I am going to operate in this sense of almost recruitment to say like, we are here and you can be here too. Lone black punk in the back of the room, you know, you actually have a place with us. So that was all my writing was doing, was trying to build a sense of community and trying to remedy a kind of, I really do think that to this day, my writing is always trying to remedy the ache of isolation. I spent so much time alone, you know, and I think to some extent I still, left to my own devices, I prefer that. But my own devices are not the healthiest devices.
Sure,
you know?
yeah.
So I think so much of my writing about music specifically is to do that thing that you just did, where you're like, are we on the same wavelength? If I do that enough times with enough people, then I am made more aware of the fact that I'm not operating in a lonely space. I'm made more aware of the fact that I no longer have to like lie about my age to connect to people about music, you know? So there's that,
Also, you weren't lying about fast writing, because you wrote They Can't Kill Us in 2 weeks?
Well,
a draft, rather?
I feel like the mythology of They Can't Kill Us, So They Kill Us is wild. But so some of the essays in that book were previously published, like 6 of them were. All of the other ones I wrote in about 2.5 weeks in Provincetown in the winter. Now, I don't know if Provincetown, Massachusetts, for those who know, is like on the very edge of the eastern. In the winter, no one's there, because why would you be there, you know? So I was like, and it gets dark at like 3 p.m. So in a state of deep depression, which I was at the time, I was like, you know, I'd be fucking sick. Going to the place where it gets dark at 2 p.m. You know what I mean? And I just went, and I'm very disciplined. I'm very lazy, but I'm very disciplined. Alarmingly disciplined. I mean, we were talking about athletics, you know, like, I love process. I don't know, how many, are people in the room athletes? Anyone? Or former athletes? So you know the kind of coach speak that happens. And I had a coach who said this thing that still sticks with me, and I still hear it. He's like, the way you do the thing is actually more important than the thing. So like, process is so important to me, because the outcome is entirely revolving around the way I do the work. And then, you know, the coach speak of like, the way you do the smallest thing is the way you do everything. And I hate coach speak cliches, because I played multiple sports my whole life, so I had so many instances of that. But there are moments where it's like, damn, the way that I do, this is a silly thing. I'm a runner, and I'm in the habit now. I used to just like kick off my running shoes after a run, but I double tie my shoes, right? And so it would make the next morning a fucking nightmare, because I would have to like, you know, and every time I have to do that, I think back to that annoying ass coach who's like, the way you do the smallest thing is the way you do everything. It's like, now I unlace, you know, post run, I unlace my shoes. But yes, so like, I went to Provincetown and got in that mode of, I'm gonna get up every morning, I'm gonna run 2 miles on the beach, 3 miles on the beach, I'm gonna write 5,000 words before the sun goes down. And that was important to me, to race against something. And I wasn't just racing against the physical action of the sun going down, I was also racing against the real mental state I was in, where I knew once it gets dark, I'm gonna be a little less useful. And then the focus, when it gets dark, the focus has to very abruptly turn to, how do I keep myself healthy until the next morning when I can do this again? And so They Can't Kill Us, So They Kill Us was a very hard, I'm gonna be honest, I have a hard relationship with that book. I don't necessarily think one should suffer for their output. And I have a hard time. It's bizarre that I'm thankful that book is the book that most people seem to love very much. But it's so bizarre to have a book that everyone has most people seem to have this really joyous relationship with. And I'm like, that was the worst, maybe the worst 2 weeks of my life, you know? But it also informed the situation where it's like, never again do I want to write a book that's not just really propelled by pleasure. Even if it's a difficult book, you know, there's always, this year was a difficult book, but I had the best time writing it. The best time writing it. I'm writing like the bleakest poems of my life right now, you know, and I'm having an incredible time. It's like, really, I mean, and I think that's kind of what that's what They Can't Kill Us taught me. It's like, you don't want your legacy to be tied to something that is inherently painful.
And traumatic. That really resonates to me as a writer as well, thinking about probably before my book, the most sort of read piece of mine was an article that I wrote in 2019 on Black Sound.
I know that article well.
And I wrote that article like after I had almost died in a house fire,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
And
yeah,
there was
yeah.
an accident that I had where like the glass smashed on my forehead, and it was a whole thing. And I think back to how the hell did I even get that article? It was manic. It was mania, right? And it's a mania that I have literally worked through PTSD therapy, right? That I do not plan to return to if I can do anything to help that, even if it was a sense of sort of like control mania that led to a certain productivity, right?
Right.
I don't even know what the hell control mania is, but you know.
It exists.
You know.
I mean, I do, and I think too, so much of my discipline as an artist does stem from trying to manage what I know and understand about myself. Because, yeah, I mean, I'm really rigorous. I think discipline as a person too. Because I am very lazy. Left to my own devices, I would rather do nothing. But what I do love...
Is this also where we share? No.
I do love fulfilling my routines more than I love doing nothing, which I guess is a curse. Because, well, I mean, maybe it's beneficial for those who like reading my things, but I would rather do absolutely nothing. And this is why I was a bad bandmate when I was in a band. You know, it was like I didn't want to do shit. And back then, I really didn't have to do shit. You know, coming up on the punk scene, there's a joke. I feel like if there are punks in the room, maybe you heard, where either you are the bad bassist boyfriend or you have the bad bassist boyfriend. I was definitely the bad bassist boyfriend. Yeah.
Wow.
Unfortunately.
You know, so you also talk a bit about how you came into writing poetry.
Yeah.
Right, and I'm wondering if you can share with us a bit about sort of that turn in a way that was also about how your writing was already considered to be, you know, about music too, or so poetic.
Yeah, it's
right?
because editors weren't fucking with me.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
I was writing music criticism for like regional papers, right? And editors stopped taking my work because they were like, this is too poetic and too meandering. But I didn't know what that meant. I didn't study poems in high school. It's not like now where high school teachers are teaching poems. So I was like, I knew who like Langston Hughes was. This is 2011, 2012. And Columbus at the time had this really robust poetry scene, open mic scene, a poetry slam scene. And my sister was like, you should reach out to the writer Scott Woods, who still is, to this day, my dearest mentor. I still think of him as, and I went to his open mic night and I was like, who should I be reading, you know? And he gave me, it's wild, I just emailed Gabrielle Calacaresi today to tell them this story, because I don't think they'd ever heard it.
Apocalyptic Swing, right?
Yeah, well, Scott was like, you should go buy Apocalyptic Swing. You know, he had just read that book. He's like, this book was blowing my mind. I couldn't afford it. I was like coming off of living off the streets and all this. Every dollar really counted. But I wrote down Gabby's name and I started going to used bookstores and searching for anything. Because I found the last time I saw Amelia Earhart and got this used beat up copy of that book that was already annotated. Someone who had it before me annotated it. And I didn't know that book is a bunch of poems in different voices. It's people, from the perspective of people watching Amelia Earhart get into the plane the last time, and there's a poem cycle about the Hartford Fire from 1944, 46. And so I didn't know poems could be, I thought all books of poems were in various voices. I was like, this is wild. Like, poems can be anything, you know? To have that be my first poetry book, I was like, what the fuck? Like, in that book, I worked at this breakfast diner at the time, which was ideal for me because I was going out to punk shows all night. So I would stay out all night and then go to work from like 6 a.m. to noon and then go to bed and then wake up and I would try to write poems like Gabby's. I would try to mirror the poems in the book and fail, obviously. And then I got Adrian Matika's mixology because that was another way I was pointed. And at the time I was so foolish. I was like, I just want to write poems about music, and no one's doing that. And in Adrian's book, there's this poem, in Mixology, there's this poem called Maggot Brain, which is still to this day one of my favorite poems in history, which is about Eddie Hazel. And there's this line at the end of it, Maggot Brain, someone somewhere is losing a mama right now. And I remember reading that and being like, I wish I could write one thing half as good as that line, you know? And that changed me. And I just kept building my collection with a little bit of money I had. And I spent a year kind of teaching myself poems, just in my room, reading poems and writing them and doing poetry slam, which was a massively important thing for me because I came up in the time of Poetry Slam where I was like having my mind blown everywhere. Like I'm trying very hard not to embarrass people, but like these two, Sam and Hugh, were so important to me. And they were we were in this like cohort of poets like Dinesh Smith and Franny Choi and Cameron Awkward Rich, and I felt so, I get somewhat emotional talking about this because I felt so embraced, and I was just like a person. So many of them, like so many of them, like but they like came up together, or
Come
like
on stage.
they like came up through like poetry. They came up through like Brave New Voices and Youth Slam type stuff.
Yeah.
I wasn't like that. I was just I was just like, hi, I'm just a guy. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I felt so immediately accepted, and it had, I think, little to do with my work as it was, and more to do with my work as it could be. But because they were all so committed to being better writers, and this was at a time where I think it's important to mention a lot of people were deriding slam in a way that felt very racialized, really, because there was this idea of like these folks can perform but they can't write.
Right.
And so there was a way that I felt like we circled around each other. There used to be these events like National Poetry Slam events, and we would compete in them. I say compete loosely, and then we would go to someone's hotel room at the end of the night, and we would sit in a circle, we'd do these ciphers, and we would read poems to each other. And to no audience, just like 10 of us in a room, 10 or 11, and you would someone would read a poem, and then they would pick you to read a poem. Or they would pick the next person to read a poem. And I remember Franny Choi is one of my favorite writers in history. Franny Choi is one of my favorite writers in the world, right? And there was this, to this day, there's this noise that Franny makes when they're like pleased by what they're hearing. It's like a very sharp but soft exhale. And I got so familiar with that sound in that room because the rooms would be so quiet. Just a person reading poems and these very silent reactions to them. And I remember being like, I want to write something. The only goal I had when I was a young poet early on was like, I want to write something so good that I can make Franny make that noise. And honestly, I'm not bullshitting. To this day, I hear that in my head. Like I'm propelled by that. I'm propelled by the affections of my friends who were working at the same time I'm working. And that defines me as a poet more than anything because, and I wouldn't have that if not for the community that was built through Slam and this space where people were not believing in the work we were doing, so we had to only believe in ourselves, checking for ourselves when no one else checking for us. So I'm so propelled by that work to say, I hope that Sam likes a poem. I hope that Hugh likes a poem. I hope that Franny somewhere likes a poem of mine. I hope that Dinesh, whenever Dinesh and I read together, which is both rare and not, there's this desire, I think, to really show out for each other. And that's so beautiful to me. Like there's this real desire to show out.
Wow. I feel like we actually just started talking, and apparently I only have a few more minutes to ask my couple of questions. And as we talked before, you saw I had 7 categories of questions.
I blew it. I
not
talked
just
too
the
much.
questions themselves.
I was yapping too much.
Oh, no. This is beautiful because we've covered, we've gotten through so many things. So
I refuse to leave. The spirit of ego-driven resistance is...
this is. I was really trying to buy myself time to figure out what question I was going to ask next because there's so many that I want to get into, but also there's a way that, it matters what you ask in these moments when you're about to wrap up, right?
Let's knock them out.
Damn. Which? Okay, so let's see. Sorry, y'all. You kind of touched on it already in the ways that being an athlete, right, and also being a fan of athletics, right, and a studier of athletics, right, thinking about how that shapes the way you write. And so maybe you can come to tell us a bit how you came to There's Always This Year, right, as your latest work, because, themes that run through your work, in sports and Cleveland, right, as well as you've discussed already, sort of grief, place, and devotion as being sort of three thematic elements that kind of run through your oeuvre so far. But sports in Cleveland, they come back. And so, how or why sort of at this moment, how did that emerge for you as the subject to explore that covers many things, really?
I love There's Always This Year as a great testing of my belief that aboutness is a myth. To say this book is about something is a complete myth. That book to sell it to Random House, I had to be like, this is a book about basketball, for sure. Nothing else going on.
Yeah.
You know, when I wrote the proposal, I was like, book about basketball, and I gave them the essay. There's that essay in the middle of the book about he got game my dad shooting a jump shot. I was like, this is the most basketball-y thing, you know? And they were like, oh yeah, LeBron James, we know who that is, basketball. And I was like, and the minute I sat down to write that book, I was like, time to write about death.
Yeah,
you know what I mean? But I think, really, every time I sit down to write a book, I ask myself this real important question that I think is the organizing question, which is what am I afraid of this time out? And the goal of the book process is not to become less afraid of the thing. It is to perhaps tighten up my relationship with it. I very much hit the point where I realized, sorry to get bleak, I specifically chose to not read one poem tonight because I was like, this is too dark maybe for in my mind, it's very joyful. But folks who know my work know I talk a lot about like this idea of bewilderment at having survived past the point where I did not think I was going to live beyond 27. And so many of my friends did not. So many of my friends died before they were, and I was like, I think I'm going to follow this path. And this thing that happens when you survive yourself and you're the worst impulses of yourself is that people imagine that it's entirely gratitude. All you have is gratitude. I feel like so rarely people don't talk about like the bewilderment of like being 15 years beyond that point and saying there are many ways that this feels unfair. Yeah. You know? And I'm actually not prepared for a long life. It's almost like beginning again and having a second childhood. And I wanted to write a book that really grappled with my fear. I'm not afraid of dying, which does mean in some ways that I'm immensely afraid of living. Actually, genuinely afraid of being alive for a very long time because I've seen what that does to people. I'm in community with elders who are deeply in love with life and in love with the world. And I feel like I look at them and say, I don't think I have that in me. To put this in a more streamlined way, I was trying to confront the potential for me to age with dignity in a principled commitment to care and love for both myself and others. At the same time, my father and I have a deeply complicated relationship, and yet I am becoming him, you know? And I wanted to write a book that was generous to my father, even though he's never gonna read it. We had a piece of that book got excerpted in the New Yorker, and so they had to call, and it was a piece about my dad. It was a piece in the beginning about my dad like sweating while eating meals.
Fact checking.
They had to fact check it, and so they had to call my dad.
Were you sweating on that?
And so I was like, I hit up my dad, and I was like, yo man, like the New Yorker doesn't call you asking me weird questions because they're excerpting an essay from the book that is about you. And he said, cool. And they called him to fact check it. A week later, I was like, yo, the piece came out. I was talking to my brother. I was like, yo, that piece came out. He was like, oh, he ain't read that. And I was like, the thing that they called him about. But I wanted to write a book that was generous to my father because my dear friend Angel Nafis says this thing that's like, I don't just want grace, I require it. Like it is a requirement. Yeah. And I have a hard time. I'm so eager because our society is so dominated by a hunger to punish. And so I really rely on my ability to offer grace to others. Not to myself, if my therapist is watching. I said it, not to myself. I feel like anytime I try to, my therapist, it's like the spidey sense goes off. She's like, he's not being honest about his emotional landscape. But I wanted to find a place where I could have grace for my father because I am becoming him. And it's happening without my knowledge. And so there's gonna come a point where I do need to learn the language of grace for myself as I become someone who I have complicated feelings towards, yet still love. And the last thing I will say is that I wanted to write a book that was very invested in the work of accumulation. So I could talk very like formally about what the countdown clock is doing and the line breaking and the countdown clock, but really I love works of accumulation in song, in poems. The reason I love Knocks Me Off My Feet, for example, is because it is a song of deep accumulation. It is a song that the verses are almost perfunctory. He's trying to speed out of the verses to get back to the repetition points of the chorus. I love the poem, You're Who I Love. Like that poem is that poem is one of the best poems I've ever read in my life because it is a poem that is so committed to the work of accumulation. The work of Ross Gay is so important to me because it's like, I could be finished, however I'm not. I'm returning and I'm returning and I'm returning. And I wanted to, again, like so much of my work is, I'm still the kid who's trying to mimic the poems I like. I'm still the kid trying to write Gabrielle Calvacaresi poems in my bedroom. I was like, how can I take the spirit of these poems and these songs I love and carry them throughout an entire book to tell people, I could be gone, but I'm not. I could be gone, but I'm not. I could be gone, but I'm not. And since I'm here, I've built a doorway for you to come through too.
Wow. Thank you so much for your thoughtful, meaningful responses to my questions here.
Wow, so look at all those cards. Let's get to it.
A lot of cards, right? This is good, and they're great questions as well. Unfortunately, we will not be able to get to all of them, but I'll try to pull as much around this as possible.
Yeah.
I'm going to throw my question in the mix.
I love that. I love like we ain't gonna get to all these, and we're gonna get to even less of them.
You can answer it or not right now, but I'm going to
I'm here like all year.
Right.
Well, somewhat all year. So you can like come find me and ask me questions in the hallways of, I don't know. I don't really know campus very well.
This is the question I think that you'll like, and I think we can kind of get through quickly. Do you have any NBA hot takes or opinions to fire off before the season starts?
Yeah. Well, get through quickly. Are you kidding? Timberwolves win the championship.
I know, right?
The Minnesota Timberwolves are going to win the championship, first of all. I know it is true that I have said that for the past 31 years of my life, and it has never come true, which is actually an argument for it coming true. A real NBA hot take I have is that there's a real imbalance in the conferences, the ferocity of which has not been seen, I think, for a long time. And that's actually horrible for the sport. It's horrible specifically for me as someone who lives on the East Coast, who has to, in order to watch good games, stay up till 10 p.m. at night. I also, though, think that there's a reckoning coming with the WNBA right now that I think is going to ripple into the NBA, where we ask questions of, how is this game serving the players? How is it serving the sport? So I think that's important. But my most hot take is Timberwolves will win the championship. I do think it's going to be the Timberwolves and the Knicks in the finals. I think the Knicks are really equipped to win the East. The East is fucking horrible. There's like 2 good teams in the Eastern Conference, and then like the Pistons are fun. Yeah, my brain right now, because I can't think too much about the Timberwolves before they start the season, because there's something obscene that I know you said we get through this quickly. I'm sorry.
No.
Sports fandom is undignified behavior, first of all. There's something absolutely obscene about the fact that every year I surrender a part of my mental and emotional well-being to a bunch of random millionaires dribbling a basketball.
This is what
And the fact that I convince myself every year that those millionaires are going to win. Aces won? Really? By how much? 2? Woo! Becky keeps finessing herself into. I don't think she's a good coach, but she wears a blazer. She wears the fuck out of a blazer. I will say, sports fandom is undignified. You have to convince yourself every year that something is going to happen that probably won't happen, and then you're devastated, which is stupid to be devastated about, and then 6 months later, you're like, that good thing is going to happen for me this time, and it never does. So, it is, in some ways, the most dignified practice. It's like romantic, in a way. How many of us have had our hearts broken repeatedly and then returned to the site of pain, hoping for something different?
Yeah.
Is anyone in the room newly brokenhearted? Is anyone in the room who's newly brokenhearted never going to give love another shot again? No? You're a sports fan.
That was very helpful for me, a non-sports fan, to hear, actually. Someone says that they've been listening to There's Always This Year, which you read yourself. But can you talk about voice in poetry and prose, and particularly here, and how you approach speaking and reading? How does your sounding words relate to your writing them? That's really especially the part of the question that I find very compelling. How does your sounding words relate to your writing them?
don't love to hear the sound of my own voice, but I like to record my drafts. I record myself in the draft phase, poems, prose, all of it. The poet, early on, the poet Jamal May, who, looking back, I think this was like a loving nudge. You know, the first poetry slam I ever performed in, Jamal May came like after me. It was Rust Belt in Columbus. Y'all remember that? He did Sky Now Black with Birds, and I was like, this poem, I was like, if that's what poems are, I'm in the wrong business. And Jamal said this thing to me after I went on stage where he said, if you're gonna read your poems out loud, you should be intentional about it. And I was like, how do I do that?
Okay.
The thing is, I tend to think that language is a form of instrumentation. To say the voice is an instrument, I think, cuts off the ability of language. And instead, I think to say the language is the instrumentation and the voice is the amplification system through which the instrument travels. For example, the variation on the theme Little Light poem, there's so many L sounds in that poem intentionally to kind of run together to create a kind of sonic experience. Sam has a poem about lisping where the S sounds kind of run through entirely, and it eventually, it's almost like a noise album. I profiled this noise artist, Dream Crusher, a while ago, and they said this thing I'll never forget, where they were like, if you run enough things together with enough frequency, then everything becomes noise. Because they were saying they were resenting being called a noise artist. And they were like, if you play the same Taylor Swift song 10 times in a row, maybe it's a bad example this week. If you, but whatever, it all becomes noise. And so I tend to want to kind of deconstruct the wall of noise that gets built through the repetitive function of language, and instead ask people to turn their attention to the L sounds or the S sounds, or the percussive sounds, the P's, B's, M's even, as a percussive function. And I love how a word, when repeated, there's this flaw in thinking, I think, where people say, well, if you repeat a word enough time, it loses its meaning. It actually doesn't. It loses its form. But that means you can play with it. And there's always this here that there's that whole section where the word gang repeats itself a bunch of times. And so by the end, it starts out where the word gang is this nefarious thing. Gang is being used through the lens of white outsiders who are like, there are gangs here. But by the end, it's affectionate. It's my homie saying, like, I'm gonna have a gang of kids, and my kid's gonna have a gang of kids. And that only works because through that word repeating itself like 12 times in that small space, it loses its form so that the reader forgets that it ever was violent. And that means I get to determine what it is, you know? I get to say, this is a term of affect, and because it is, you know? I get to say, like, this is a term of endearment, and that's all it's ever been. And that's it. Forget what was there. We're here. And I tend to think that that is also a question of sound. Training people's ears, which allows you to train, ideally, their hearts and brains. I believe in that fully. Yeah.
We haven't been able to talk a lot about your music writing in this session, and that is, you know, one of the things that...
I know, I love the music. I love to talk about music.
As a musicologist, you know...
Are there any music questions on those cards?
There are. I was going to ask this one for that reason. So what do you find in the space between language and music? It's kind of back to the language thing. There are often such different languages here, so they're referring back to sort of Miles Davis's famous quote about saying, talking about music is like dancing about architecture.
Yeah. I think the reason I guess I can't speak for the broad people. The reason I love cover songs is because it really pushes the idea that it is not the existing source material of language, it's how something is said. The perfect example of this is Maxwell's version of This Woman's Work, right? Which is like not, people know that Kate Bush's version, the original version, which first off, the reason why Maxwell's version of This Woman's Work is, to me, the greatest cover of all time is because the original version of This Woman's Work is a great song. And it's not just a great song, it's a great Kate Bush song. And a great Kate Bush song is like some shit that God has on his playlist.
Literally.
You know what I mean? And so This Woman's Work,
made by Kate,
the original Kate Bush version of This Woman's Work is about a woman who is dying during childbirth. Like actually plainly. If you listen to the lyrics, it's very plain. It's the least abstract Kate Bush song that exists, probably. Maxwell's version of This Woman's Work gets played at weddings. Yeah. It gets played in moments of intimacy, or so I've been told.
I
I'm a wholesome,
played it at a wedding before on the violin, to be honest.
But it's all about how Maxwell turns the phrases in the song. He takes it word by word. And so there's that point in the unplugged version where the bridge extends, and instead of show me your hand, he inserts the word pretty. That single word actually turns the entire machinery of that song. And so you can forget that you are listening to something. Also, he plays with the function of the song, which in Kate Bush's case is a song where a husband is in conversation with a dying wife and is saying, I do not want you to go. Maxwell's song is also saying, I don't want you to go, in a different shape. It takes a different shape. There's a difference between, I want you to stay, I don't want you to go. One, perhaps as someone is on the verge of crossing over the threshold to another world. One, as someone perhaps stands in the doorway to your bedroom and you would like them to stay. There's a very thin line between the romantics of bidding someone farewell as they descend into, or ascend. Somebody's going to hell, so perhaps descend. And bidding someone farewell as a lover decides whether or not they want to extend their time. So I think the function of this may not is answering the question, but the function of the cover, and this shows up so much in cover songs, is the way that someone approaches language. I hate the song Electric Feel by MGMT, right? Can't stand it. The reason I can't stand it is because lyrically, the line, ooh, girl, shock me like an electric eel, is fucking stupid. And it's not only stupid, it's stupid, and it was clearly written as a bridge. It's one of those like bridge lines because they needed to get to something that rhymed with feel. Now, the band Claws has a version of Electric Feel that is perfect. And it's perfect because the lead singer takes that line, that very stupid line, incredibly seriously. And that function, I would encourage everyone to listen to it. It's on many playlists that I have, if anyone wants to. But like the way she sings it, the way she breaks apart the word eel and gives each letter its own syllable, it makes it sexy, it makes it ferocious in a way and not something to be thrown away. And so I think the way that I frame language in music is the phenomenon of the cover and how we hear people altering language all the time to suit their needs. Maxwell heard Kate Bush's This Woman's work and saw something else underneath it and said, I know how to extract that. And it's a trick of language the whole way through.
Wow. So this question, I think, was already answered. What is necessary to really hear music? That was actually an example of how you listen to music, so I think we can cover that there.
Sorry if I got overwhelmed.
No. How might you consider rap, right, within the traditions of a public intellectual?
Sorry, I don't know. I'm thinking about KRS. My brain went to KRS-One immediately, which was like a comical version of, respect KRS-One, it was like a very comical version of the capital C conscious rapper archetype.
Yeah.
I think about, I grew up at a very interesting time where rap was becoming very strictly regional.
Yeah.
And I think about the public intellectual as it takes shape around the rapper as someone who is a tour guide or ethnographer maybe, or someone who's archiving I just remember hearing ATLians when I was a kid and being like, really thinking Atlanta was like outer space. I hadn't been to Atlanta before. And I remember being like, and I think about I think about the lineage of this Jid's album, not the new one. I didn't love the new one as much, but the Forever Story. I was listening to that when it came out. I was like, this is in the lineage of ATLians because it is building in Atlanta where anything is possible, where like dinosaurs are roaming and Cadillacs are floating through the air, and UGK was big, and Ghetto Boys were big at the time, and they presented this level of Houston that was both beautiful and dangerous, you know. And I didn't have any relationship to California, but everything G-Funk was coming out of California. So there's a way that I think the hyper-regionalization of hip-hop. I remember watching the video for Country Grammar when it came out. Yeah. And then going to St. Louis shortly thereafter, and I was like, oh, it actually is this. Like, I don't know if anyone remembers the video for Country Grammar, but he's like in the front of the row houses, in the cars, the Chevys and shit. And I was like, oh, niggas is actually like this out here. It was bananas to me, but not. Because if you think about, I love Bone Thugs and Harmony, not just because of the Ohio thing, but I think they were actually incredible rappers who also made people come to them. What I love about Bone Thugs and Harmony is that in the 90s when people were guesting on their songs, often people would try to rap like them. At a time, they were defining a style. You have to come to us. We're not going to come to you. And they loved Ohio so much so that they named their first record East 199th Street, off of like that strip in Cleveland, and people would come and just to take pictures of that sign.
Yeah.
People would drive from all over just to take pictures of that sign. Like when Cuddy was a kid, he was coming up, that to me, again, because I bristle at the sense of the word public intellectual, what I'm actually thinking about is how can you do the thing that I was attempting to do when I was writing in those punk zines, which is from your position in the world, make your place irresistible. And I think that rappers have done that so well throughout our time.
This is a question I think connects to one that I said I would ask earlier. I just don't know if we have the full time for mine, so I think this is a good way to think about it. But how to stay honest, right, in a post-truth society, okay, with finding your own voice despite all of the, back into this word of noises, despite all of the noises in the world. How to stay honest, right, with finding your own voice despite all the noises in the world.
There's this video I love of Fela in Africa 70 performing Pansa Pansa in 1976 on the stage. Fela Kuti, for those who are not familiar. And Fela's doing this thing. I don't know if anyone's, this is like a video that has like 100,000 views on YouTube, and I'm 99,000 of them. So Fela's doing this thing before, first off, like Africa 70 is the best band, I think one of the best bands in history. In history. If Africa 70 was a bunch of white people from Memphis, we'd be talking about Africa 70 like they were, you know what I mean? But like, Tony Allen's like one of the best drummers ever lived, you know? And Fela's doing this thing before Pansa Pansa where he's pacing around the stage. He's so fucking cool. He's got a cigarette. He's wearing like a pantsuit, this green pantsuit that looks like a grandmother's couch, you know what I mean? And it's like fitted, and he's pacing around the stage holding a cigarette, and the band is getting in this groove. It's incredible because he starts out by counting them in this way I'll never forget. He starts out by counting them in this very dramatic thing where he like points at Tony Allen and does this with a cigarette in his hand. And he's building, what he's doing is he's building the sound. He's building, it takes like 2 minutes to get everything exactly as he wants it before he puts his cigarette out, goes to a saxophone. And I love that because what he is actually doing, the band didn't need that much direction, right? But what he's actually doing is performing to the audience to say, I am trying to align your beliefs to mine, which is that precision is important. And the way we do the smallest thing is important. And also, we can make precision look good, and we can make precision aesthetically pleasing. The issue is, I think, right now, there's more of a desire on the aesthetics superseding the precision of every form almost. Some of this, too, something that concerns me greatly is that the world is becoming increasingly more isolated. And isolation does not come at no cost. Isolation, the toll you pay for that is cruelty, interpersonal cruelty. On levels that are
individualistic.
Individualistic. And when you treat and I guess this is veering towards a conversation about AI perhaps, but when you treat the world, the whole world, like it's an assignment you have to conquer, you know? Which is so much of what this is, like make this thing easier so I can do something else that I can also make easier.
No process in the middle.
No process. You are extracting the part of you that is you're extracting your actual heart from the process of living. And you can't do that and say the heart will not pay a toll. The toll, it atrophies.
Absolutely.
Your heart atrophies. And that leaves you susceptible to not only cruelty, but a will and a desire to believe anything.
Absolutely.
You will believe anything if it makes some part of your individual world, your individual isolated world, an inch easier. You'll believe the photo of like the hippo flying or whatever the fuck. And why I bring up the Fela thing is because it's not just a commitment to precision, it's also a commitment to care. It's a commitment to saying, I have asked you to spend time with me and these people I love. And I would like us to be as good as we can be for you, because this isn't just something we want to breeze through. This is something that we want to be meaningful for a long time. I don't think dishonesty is born, I think, out of many things, but one thing it's born out of is a desire to move through the world as though you have to finish everything as quickly as possible.
Yeah.
And what will we do with our hearts that don't work well?
Yeah.
What will we do with our hearts that are faulty, other than lose the ability to be very precise with how we care about things? I'm very afraid for the future of our atrophied hearts. But the good news is that video is on YouTube still. So if you want to watch that.
You know, so this will
Sorry to be a bummer. Hopefully that wasn't the last question.
No, actually, I think I'll end the. I'll wrap up here with the question that I have actually about flowers.
Okay. Sweet.
Okay.
There's no way I can make this one a bummer.
Well, I'm gonna maybe for the context that I ask it. Let me see. So, maybe just tell us, you know, as we wrap up here about your relationship, right, to flowers. They show up in photos, right? They show up in your work, and really, you know, it really resonated to me. And you know, there's a lot of repetition that repetition within variation that takes place throughout your works, thematically and otherwise, right? Which I really can appreciate for various reasons. But there's a recurring poetic theme, right? And again, a fortune that how can Black people write about flowers at a time like this? And you tell us in several different ways, right, throughout that work. And so maybe just can you tell us a little bit about your relationship to flowers in your work?
You know the line that poem title is that's something that a white woman said when Ross Gay was reading a poem. I was at this. It was like after the election in 2016, and I was at this reading with me and Ross, and I was. You know how sometimes I feel like white people are especially afflicted with this, where like they think they're whispering, but they are fucking yelling. You know what I mean? And so it's like I was sitting, and this woman was behind me, and she was like whisper yelling to her friend while Ross is reading this beautiful poem. He might have been reading like the entirety of Catalog of Unabashed Gratitude, the poem, and that poem isn't even like, you know, it maybe mentions a flower, and she whispered that to, and I was like, what an incredible thing to say. And I think like the slam poet that still lives within was like, I'm gonna write a poem about that woman and I'm gonna read it, you know. But then as it was like that Frosted Mini Wheat commercial where it's like the kid side of me wanted this, but the adult side, the adult side was like, I don't think she's the poem. I think that impulse is the poem. I don't know. I didn't grow up. I grew up around a lot of concrete, like a lot. I didn't grow up around fields, around gardens, around. I didn't have access to it. I know that's a very cliche thing, and I don't think that. I try very hard to write Blackness in a way that does not render it to be this like cliched, you know, sitcom-y thing. But it is true that I grew up around a lot of asphalt. At the same time, so I didn't see a lot of flowers. And so my relationship with flowers early on was like, I don't think I have access to them. But also, and I'm gonna bring this in to tie this all together, I promise. This, like while I'm in Palo Alto, I'm staying with one of my old punk friends, and all my old punk friends are having kids now, which is so beautiful and strange to me, because it's like, man, it feels like just yesterday when you were literally like sleeping on the floor of a van in your own vomit, and now here's a baby, you know? And to get back to to think about what I was talking about earlier about like survival and the bewilderment. So what bewilders all of us, because we're all these people who thought we wouldn't survive when all of our friends were dying, is that this child is almost an extension of, like last night I watched this person I love so deeply and I've loved for so many years put her daughter to bed, and all I could think to say was, fucking look at us. Like we really are alive. Like we really did this shit. And now there's a version of you that is smaller and has your little nose and your little eyes. And I love that version who does not even recognize me as a full human yet. I love that version of you so much that I would die for that baby. And that baby makes me want to stay alive that many inches more. And so there's this mode that I've operated in around trying to put myself in a position where I'm distinctly aware of what presses me up against the desire to live. And the flower thing, I was on tour for 1.5 years straight, like no bullshit. Like I you know, when
that's a long time.
Yeah, for a long ass time for a book tour. The book, it's not that good, you know. It hit a point where I was like, y'all just got to go home. Like, I was in like Chattanooga, and I loved it. I no lie, but I was like, what the fuck y'all doing here? what am I doing here? But I was on tour for a year and a half, and before I went on tour, I asked a lot of my musician pals I was like, what do I do to just keep my brain together, to do this many dates? And one of my friends said, you have to get into a habit that reminds you every day is different. And so I would go to local florists, every tour stop, I'd go to local florists and say, what do you have today? That is, and so every night, and this is thank you to whoever did this to kind of build upon the tradition that defined my tour in some ways. Every night I would have a different bouquet of flowers that I would be looking at because, I'm a person who very open about my mental afflictions, like deeply, depressive disorder, anxiety disorders. And one thing that I need, I think, to ground myself, to again, push myself up against the glass of a desire to be alive. And it's just something I could point out and say, look at that. Like, that's a different thing, and it's doing its best. And I think about that. I thought about that this week when I was with my pal, and I was like, look at that. Like, you made, and you only made that by virtue of us surviving when we didn't believe we could survive.
Right.
And now that little person exists, and we are going to survive together endlessly for as long as that person's alive. I'm trying to be alive. The flowers are the same thing, where it's like, for as long as they are here on the night, I know I can get through the end of the night. And so I still don't know shit about flowers. I know nothing about flowers. I know I like sunflowers, so that's cool. Just 2 weeks ago, I learned that what a dahlia is. I was just getting them. And the person I get flowers for myself once every 2 weeks. And the person at the florist was like, do you want your usual dahlias? And I was like, the fuck is that?
The flower I've been getting.
And she was like, the flower you've been getting for the past year? And so I don't know anything about them. But I really like very momentarily, and this is maybe why I like being in the company of my friends' children too, because I'm like a freelance uncle in a way. I very much like being momentarily in the care of something or someone that says you're required to keep going for the opportunity to be in the care of this someone or something again and again and again. And so perhaps that's the best way I can describe my relationship with a flower.
Yes, thank you so much. I don't know why I'm thinking stuff in my head.
Thank you.
Yes.
Oh, that's so nice. Thanks.